Good afternoon now. We'll kick off now. So good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation on a look into your future career and what to expect in 2030. This session is with Shara Evans and I'll introduce her in a moment. So I'm Sandra Roussel, I head up Learning and Development and I respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we're all in collectively, and I pay respect to their elders past and present. I hope you would have noticed that we're here as part of Virtual Career Expo. It started last week and it's going to go for this week and 2 more weeks. It's a 4-week virtual expo where we are looking to provide you with guidance and information on how you shape your career and your learning opportunities. So over the course of the 4 weeks, we'll be providing a variety of events. This is one, the live stream event. We have another one of these later on. We have some Show Me How sessions, some speed mentoring with SES, a range of webinars, and a digital show bag where we have a range of information which is really quite interesting. So I encourage you to go and have a look at in my ATO on the Virtual Career Expo page, and in particular to see what's happening in your site. This year we have a special focus on the future of work, which is exploring trends and innovations in technology, in government and in service delivery. Now this session aligns nicely with that, and it's about a possible glimpse into what life and work might look like in 2030, how technology may impact on the type of work that we do from day to day and how we do these roles. It also looks at how to prepare and position yourself to thrive into the future, to be future ready. This is a live stream event. You would have all been given a little piece of paper as you walk in, maybe not so relevant for people in Canberra. Shara's going to talk with us for 45 minutes, and then we're going to open up for question and answer. So in Canberra, just put up your hand and we'll have a roving mic, but out in the other sites, please use the website on this piece of paper to type in your questions. You can be typing these in at any point, and they'll come to me and I'll be asking them of Shara in 45 minutes. So let me get started by introducing Shara. Shara is one of the world's top female futurists. She draws on her engineering background to consider how societies are likely to respond to new technologies. In her day job, she works quite a lot and extensively with executive strategy and product teams to help them understand new products and service opportunities. She sees her roles as getting organisations to think outside of the box about what is available today to imagine the world in 5, 10 years from now. And she helps them commercialise these products into new opportunities and services. She's the founder and CEO of Market Clarity, an award-winning technology analyst firm. She founded Telsite, which is sold to publicly listed UXC, and she's a regular media commentator on technology issues. She's been on Sky News, The Drum, 7:30, and regularly quoted in the papers like the AFR, The Age, etc. So without further ado, please let me introduce Shara Evans, and please join me in welcoming her.
Thanks so much, Sandra. Good afternoon, everybody, and hello to everybody in the webcast. It's my absolute delight to be part of ATO's Virtual Career Expo. We are living in a time of absolutely massive change on so many fronts. We have geopolitical events that are unfolding, the likes of which we haven't seen since the 1960s. We have major climate change happening to our planet. We've got population growth. And of course, we also have very rapid technological advancements, as well as advancements in medical technology that are combining with ICT that have the potential to change what it means to be human. Automation is happening at a pace that is much faster than most people expect. There was a study done earlier this year by an HR company called Randstad, and one of the questions that they asked thousands of people across Australia was, do you think your job will be impacted by automation in the next few years? And 84% of people said no. In America, last year, Pew Research asked a similar question of a US audience, and of them, 80% of the people thought that their jobs would be unchanged or substantially unchanged for the next 50 years. Can you imagine it? 50 years. Yet we have all kinds of studies that are talking about massive job losses or massive changes to the kinds of work that people do. Here in Australia, CETA did a report a couple of years ago that was looking at a potential job loss of 5 million people in a 10 to 15 year period because of automation. About a year ago, the World Economic Forum looked at 15 industrialized countries and determined that there'd be 5 million job losses in these countries due to automation, and that those countries included Australia. And that's just by 2020. That's only a couple of years away. So why do we have this disconnect between things that are happening in the world of automation and what people think will happen? And I have a theory, and to share this, I'll go back 50 years to 1967. In 1967, only the very biggest companies had mainframe computers. The only people who typed in companies were specialized typing pools. You'd never see a CEO type. You had milkmen delivering milk to your house. Of a graduating class of university students, of the women who graduated, more than 50% listed post-graduation careers as homemakers. And in 1967, it was made constitutional in the US to have an interracial marriage. Here, we look at that today and we think, oh my God, you know, that is just so archaic. And we've had these advances in technology, but they've been happening at a slow and steady pace. Every 18 to 24 months, they're doubling. But what's happened is that here we are in 2017 and we're at a high pace. And now it's doubling every 18 to 24 months and the curve is going like this. That's what's going to catch people out. And that's why we need to be very aware of what's happening with technology and what it will mean to all of our jobs and to our lives. So when it comes to robots and jobs and automation, and here when I talk about robots, I'm talking about artificial intelligence as well, there are a number of key factors that companies will look at in determining whether or not to automate. The first is whether it's technically feasible either today or in the near future. The next is actually the cost, because if it's really, really expensive, it doesn't make sense to do. Going with that, though, is the scarcity of labor and cost of labor. Both of those things are intertwined with whether or not you automate. But it's not just about labor. It's also about enhanced productivity by adding in automation, and in particular robots. And here I'll talk about sectors like agriculture or mining, where you've got robots that are armed with sensors and are able to detect things like the health of crops and whether there are weeds, and being able to take automated action to do spot spraying of herbicide or fungicide, things that you couldn't do just from a human eyeballing a crop. So there are some real productivity benefits that can be had. But then there's also the regulatory side. And here, if you think about things like driverless cars, if suddenly it was made illegal across Australia to have a driverless car, you wouldn't see them here. Conversely, if it was made mandatory to have your car in autopilot mode in certain lanes on a highway, you would see a much higher uptake. But there's also the social interaction and reaction to automation. And here I'll turn to science fiction. Is anyone a science fiction geek in the room? Oh, a couple. One of my favorite authors growing up was Isaac Asimov, and he loved to write about robots. And one of his stories that he talked about was Earth about 1,000 years from now, where people were in these massive megacities living under domes, and they had robots, but the robots were just sort of semi-intelligent, but they were taking jobs. And there was a lot of robot bashing and a lot of hatred to robots. But in the meantime, humanity had gone extrasolar as well, and they developed much more advanced robots. In fact, in some planets, there were 10,000 robots for every human, and their robots were very advanced humanoids, to the point where in one story, a woman fell in love with a male robot and married him. So you get this whole range of things that could happen with social acceptance, all the way from robot bashing to actually falling in love with a robot. Now, one of the things that underlies a lot of automation is artificial intelligence. And when I talk about AI, I'm really referring to an umbrella term that encompasses things like machine learning and deep learning and computer vision and image recognition and natural voice recognition and emotion detection and chatbots and also smart robots. While AI sounds so futuristic, work on it actually began all the way back in 1956. In the early days of AI, researchers looked at a whole range of ways of designing AIs, but what they settled on was hard-coding AIs to mimic the decision trees of human experts. So if you wanted to have an AI lawyer, you'd interview a bank of expert lawyers or judges for months on at end, and then program that into an AI, a piece of software. That started to change in 1980 with a concept called machine learning. So rather than programming everything hard-coded into an AI, you start training it by feeding it data. Now, with machine learning, there's also a lot of human intervention. So if I wanted to teach a machine learning AI to recognize a stop sign, I'd program in the borders of the stop sign and the fact that it's red. One of the early milestones in the machine learning era was when IBM's Deep Blue won the chess match against the world reigning champ Garry Kasparov. That was in 1997. Things started to get really exciting, though, in 2010 with a technique called deep learning, and you might have heard that term. So with deep learning, rather than still requiring a lot of human intervention, because our data sets are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the AIs are now able to train themselves based on feeding it massive amounts of data. An early milestone in the deep learning era was with IBM Watson when it won the game of Jeopardy. And with Watson, it was not only learning all kinds of trivia, but it was becoming very good at natural language recognition. Things took another accelerating turn in 2015 when scientists discovered that specialized processors that allow really fast parallel processing could allow these deep learning machines to suddenly process things very, very, very quickly. And in 2016, Google's DeepMind AI won 4 out of 5 matches of a game called Go, which is thought to be a game that requires a very, very high level of strategic human thinking. AI is already huge business. Depending on which analyst firm you listen to, it's worth in 2016 anywhere from $1.4 to $8 billion. IDC estimates that AI services and software will be worth $47 billion US by 2020, and another company, Tractica, thinks that it'll be worth just under $60 billion by 2025. I think that's actually a gross underestimation. One of the aspects of AI that will impact many of you in this room and in your audience is something called robotic process automation, or RPA. And with this technique, basically the AI is able to mimic anything that a human can do with a keyboard and mouse, whether it's entering data into a database, whether it's looking at social media website and tracking things down, whether it's doing calculations in a spreadsheet, or reading and writing from almost any document that you can think of. In the financial world, this translates into being able to automatically do things like general journal ledger entries in an accounting system, or doing account reconciliation, or audit expense report audits. In the legal field, there's already an AI called Kira that's a due diligence engine that has done over 100 billion US merger and acquisition transactions. And what this AI is doing is it's going through these hundreds or thousands of documents involved in mergers and acquisitions and looking for clauses like assignment or bankruptcy or termination and determining where there are variations from a boilerplate and then pointing it out to lawyers. In the in the UK, there's another AI called Ross that's being used by a bankruptcy law firm. And in that firm, again, they have an AI that's going through the thousands of documents that are involved in a bankruptcy. And it's getting down to the nit of a problem of all of this big data, presenting it to the lawyers in a matter of like no time rather than months. And then the lawyers check back as to whether the AI is drawing correct conclusions. That's going to have a massive impact on the white-collar workforce. We're also seeing AIs that are being used to detect financial fraud. There's a spin-off called Futurist that came out of Cambridge from mathematicians there that were looking at video games and how some people were able to seemingly cheat and see through walls and be able to do video shooting. But they took this mathematical algorithm and applied it to how people interact with websites, like a banking website. So when I log into my banking portal, I have certain things that I routinely do. And what Eric, this AI, is able to do is detect in real time when people are behaving in a way that is different than their usual behavior. In other words, spotting potential fraud in real time and raising red flags. Chatbots are another really interesting aspect of artificial intelligence. Earlier this year, UBank, which is the online subsidiary of NAB, launched a chatbot for home loans. And what it did was it took the text from lots of live operator and human interactions and used that as the pool of data for deep learning for their home loan chatbot to be able to learn from. And the chatbot is able to literally help you fill out a home loan application in what they say is the space of time it takes you to eat breakfast in the morning, about 30 minutes. They're looking now to introduce additional features to the chatbot, such as emotion detection. So it turns out that even when you're chatting with text, you can pick out emotion based on the cadence of words used, or the specific words, or the tone, or the context, and also looking at potentially using voice recognition. NAB, the parent company, has also rolled out a chatbot that it's using for its business banking customers for credit and debit. So at the ATO, you have Alex. And Alex right now, I think, is hard programmed to answer a whole lot of questions, but it's not actually learning from the interaction of people with the questions that they ask. The next generation of Alex may actually be an AI-based chatbot that's able to learn from the experience of the dialogue that happens between the general public and Alex. We're also going to see a lot of speech recognition. How many of you on your smartphones use an AI interface like Siri or Cortana or OK Google? Anybody using one of those? Does anybody have a home appliance like Google Home or maybe Amazon Echo? Anybody yet? No, not yet. It's still not all that popular in Australia. But these devices are always on and always listening. They're listening for a keyword. And in fact, this was proven in a court case in Arkansas earlier this year. There was a man who was suspected of murder after a small party at his house, and he happened to have an Amazon Echo. And the police wanted to get access to the Echo records. And Amazon pushed back, citing privacy and First Amendment. No, we don't want to release it. But in the 90-page brief that they filed with the court, they actually said in writing that they are recording every conversation and they are transcribing every conversation. And you can imagine that some other companies are not just recording and transcribing it, they're mashing it with other data and they're selling it too. So imagine the implications if you've got these really smart interfaces, maybe sitting on your phone, and in about 3 years' time, they're going to be even more accurate than they are today. And it's not just your personal privacy that might be impacted, it's the people around you. But what happens when you take it into a business meeting? Maybe you're in a board of directors meeting and you're talking about a merger and acquisition, and someone has a phone that's got one of these AI devices and it's being recorded, and maybe that data is being sold, and suddenly you find as the chairman of the board that there's been a disclosure of a potential merger and acquisition before you've alerted the stock market. There could be some serious company ramifications as well. Voice biometrics are also really interesting, and I know the ATO has been using voice biometrics. I actually got to use it on Friday because I came back from a trip where I was away for 3 weeks, and I found a whole pile of stuff in my mail hold, including some stuff from the ATO, and I needed to talk to someone. So I got registered for the voice recognition, and unfortunately my call just dropped out, so I had to call back. But I was very happy that the voice recognition picked me up right away and didn't have to ask me, the 10,000 questions to be able to get through it. But when it comes to any kind of biometric, the thing to be aware of is that these can be hacked. There's actually a prototype project called Voco that allows you to take voice samples from a person and use a text editor and actually inject words that that person did not say in their actual voice using the phonemes, parts of words. And you can actually have whole conversations that sound like me, but it wasn't something that I said. So we need to be very cognizant of how these technologies could potentially backfire on us too. So when it comes to robots, so many people think this is just in the world of science fiction. We're not going to see real robots in the world for a long time. Well, guess what? That's a fallacy. I'd like to show you a couple of examples from around the world in robots in different industries, starting with the top left. That's a construction robot. It's called SAM, for semi-autonomous mason. It still has humans that feed the bricks into it. When I first looked at SAM about 2 years ago, SAM was able to lay about 1,000 bricks per day. By contrast, a typical mason will do 300 to 400 bricks a day, and a master mason might do 700, 800, maybe 900 max. Today, SAM is capable of doing 3,000 bricks per day. But that's nothing compared to a robot we have in Australia called Hadrian X. Hadrian can work 24/7 and do 1,000 bricks per hour. That is pretty spectacular. We're going to see lots and lots of robots in warehouses. This particular robot is from Locus Robotics, but if you think about a company like Amazon, they have over 47,000 robots deployed in their warehouses, and it's growing all the time. Interestingly, they're hiring more people too. The bottom right picture is a restaurant in China where you're greeted by a robot concierge who speaks multiple languages. In the kitchen, you've got robots who are doing stir fry and doing dumplings, and then robots will serve you your meal coming out on a tray. And the last picture I have is from a hardware store in San Jose, California. And they've got a robot called Oshbot. So if you're like me and you walk into a hardware store, and I don't go into hardware stores, and I've got a widget that I need, I walk in and I say, Oshbot, I need this. It'll 3D scan whatever gadget I have in my hand, display it on its face display, and ask me which one is the one that I want. And then it will just nicely wheel me over and take me to the particular aisle that that gadget is in. And on its backside, it's got a digital advertising board. And if it actually had demographic recognition, it could change the ads depending on who's in back of it. So it might have a different ad for a tradie versus a family. These are all real robots in production today, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. One of the new jobs that we're going to see in the future are all kinds of robot repairers, because the robots are going to be specialized. They're going to come in all shapes and sizes, and this is going to be a new vocational skill for so many people. One of the interesting things that you're going to see, which I've illustrated in the picture in the top right, is using a combination of augmented reality glasses to help with that repair. So with augmented reality, what you see is like out in your field of vision, additional digital information overlaid on top of the real world. So this young lady who's repairing an agricultural robot actually has this digital avatar pop up and is talking to her and saying, okay, well, first turn this knob, turn it this way, go to the next one. You're going to see augmented reality in so many different situations, not just with robot repair, but with plant repair in general. Then we come to smart cities, and there's so much happening in this area. Basically, we're putting sensors and controllers in so many places in our cities. We're making them alive and sensing data in real time. How many of you have been to Monaco recently and seen the smart parking, where it actually tells you where you've got free parking spaces? It's one of the smart city projects here in Canberra. In Sydney, where I live, they've got a project called Mousetrap. They've got sensors on the trains in Sydney that sniff out the smell of spray paint or permanent markers, and as soon as it sniffs a vandal, it turns on a CCTV camera. The feed goes to the police in the train office, and they can see in real time exactly what's happening on the train, and they can catch the graffiti vandals in real time because they're stuck on a moving train. In Italy, in Trenitalia, they're doing some really sophisticated things with sensors all across their trains for maintenance. So rather than doing maintenance on a schedule basis, they're now looking at data from sensors to take action only when required. They spend about 1.3 billion euros a year in maintenance, and by using predictive or maintenance based on these sensors, they're saving between 8 to 10% of their cost. That's big bucks. And I think there are opportunities in the ATO to look at these kinds of technologies in your plant maintenance as well. But it's not just our cities that are going to come alive, it's our homes too. How many of you have a smart TV? Anybody? You know, connected to the internet? Fridges yet connected to the internet? Washing machines? Thermostats? Echo, Google Home, any of these things? Trying to hook it all up and make it work together is not easy, even if you have a technical background. Doing it in a way that is secure is even harder still. One of the jobs of the future that we're going to see are home integration specialists who actually specialize in being able to take almost any kind of gadget that you can imagine, interfacing it into your home network and doing it behind a secure firewall. Because frankly, any vulnerability that you have means that that's where your bank account gets hacked. It might be through your refrigerator or through a smart appliance. And the same applies to taking these into an office building. Another thing that we're going to see in our homes is the rise of vocational skills like a smart handy person who's a jack of all trades, who's digitally literate and understands how these different devices work, but may not be the person who designs it or designs the security stuff, but that's the person you call when suddenly your fridge won't talk to the rest of your network and you don't know what to do, or your door lock won't open. Again, another massive new job opportunity. Another really cool technology that I've been following is Hyperloop. How many of you have heard of Hyperloop? Anybody? Yes, a couple. It's something that Elon Musk came up with in about 2012, 2013, and then open sourced it. The idea behind Hyperloop is to take a big tube and then to depressurize it, to take the air out of it so that it's at near vacuum. And when it's at near vacuum, that means that there's less resistance and less energy needed to be able to push things through it. And then use magnetic levitation to literally hurtle pods of people or cargo through these big tubes at ultra-fast speeds. A typical cruising speed would be 760 kilometers an hour, but a high speed would be 12 to 1300 kilometers per hour. This is one of the companies, Hyperloop One, that has built a test track in Nevada, and there are a number of companies doing this. Richard Branson just brought into it a few weeks ago, and it's now called Virgin Hyperloop One, and they've been successfully testing it. There are countries all over the world that are looking at the next generation of high-speed rail being Hyperloops. And even here in Australia, it's being considered. Imagine being able to commute from Sydney to Newcastle in 10 minutes. or Sydney to Canberra in 17 minutes, or Canberra to Wagga in 15 minutes, or Wagga to Albury-Wodonga in 8 or 9 minutes. Imagine if there was a hyperloop all across connecting regional Australia. It would absolutely revolutionize what it means to live in a regional area. This concept of 30-minute cities, of being able to get to all the amenities that you need within 30 minutes, suddenly becomes real. You could work in Canberra and live in Albury and still be there in about 20 minutes. From an ATO perspective, it also means that instead of relying just on video conferencing, you might see a resurgence of face-to-face meetings. It could also take the heat off of the property market as well, because what's happening not only in Australia but around the world is that people are crowding more and more and more into cities, and the property prices are getting just absolutely out of sight to where you've almost got no hope of getting into the market unless you have a very high-paying job or you inherit a lot of money. In the US, Elon Musk has a company called the Boring Company, which is basically a tunneling company that he's inventing. And he's looking at putting in a hyperloop that will go between Washington, D.C., through Baltimore, through Philadelphia, and up to New York City, taking what is a 5 to 6 hour drive down to 29 minutes. I grew up in that area. I know how long it takes. And if you're stuck in traffic, it's a whole lot longer. They're looking at multiple hyperloops in India, in Finland, in the UK, all across the world. It's not 100% proven yet, but we will be seeing these live in the next couple of years. The first one's likely to be in Dubai in the UAE between Dubai and Abu Dhabi, where they're looking to take an hour-and-a-half drive down to 12 minutes. It's like one of the first orders on the cards, and it's a super exciting technology. So I'd like to turn for a few minutes into some of the jobs of the future, because there will be so many jobs. So many people, especially futurists, talk about the robo-apocalypse where, automation is just going to wipe out all these jobs, 40 to 50% unemployment. There will be a lot of new jobs created. The trick, though, is that we need to start thinking about what these new jobs are going to be and how we start reskilling people to be able to move into them and to actually transition from where you're at now to where the future is going to be. So one of the exciting jobs that I think is an executive level job is what I would call the head of human and robot orchestration. And this would be a person or a group of people who look at your talent, whether it's human capital, whether it's AI software or physical robots, and decide how you mix them into your workforce, who does what task and how they work together. Coincident with that will be someone who's your chief transformation officer, because it's not just deciding what gets automated, it's also looking at all of this real-time data and understanding how can we make our organization more agile? How do we react to all of this real-time information? And instead of taking 6 or 12 months to analyze it and think about it, be able to move in real time. And that's going to be a big change, and it's going to be one of the major new job categories. Another thing that we're going to see that will involve a lot of human intervention is in actually training AI. So I mentioned with deep learning that we feed AI's data, but what happens with these neural networks that get developed is that you've got all these inputs coming in, and the networks get bigger and bigger and bigger, but you don't know, the AI researchers don't know what's happening inside these networks. They've got no visibility, and then you get outputs on the other side that are not always what you expect. There was a report published from OpenAI, a research think tank, a couple of months ago, and they had trained an AI to do video boat racing. And in this game, the way that you win is you cross the finish line with the most number of points, and you get points by running over these green widgets that pop up. The AI got obsessed with getting green widgets and getting points and never wanted to cross the finish line. It was going around in circles, it was crashing into other boats, it was crashing into walls, it was doing everything except actually finishing the boat race. And what the researchers determined is then as we're training these AIs, we actually need to add in loops for reinforcement learning, just like we do with little kids, And not only that, but it's humans, people, that will be needing to do this reinforcement learning, so that as we're training these AIs, we're actually training them like little kids to behave in a way that we want them to behave. Similarly, another big job category of the future is going to be a robot trainer. And I'm not talking about one of these guys training you or your kids. I mean, can you imagine this lethal autonomous weapon training your kids? Hey kid, wrong answer, choom, you're out of the game. No. What's happening in the world of robotics is initially, just like with AI, they're hard-coded to do one particular task. But using this technique called deep learning, robots are now able to learn to do different tasks on their own, but we're still going to need people who are able to feed in this information, do the reinforcement learning, and assist the robots in training to do different things, as well as physically programming them to do different tasks and physically changing their configuration. Another thing that is going to be very important in our future, especially as we start to live alongside of these AIs and robots, is to actually teach them to be more human-like in how they interact with us. And I'm calling this job category an empathy trainer. And here I'm talking about human heart space. The things that we do where we're listening to somebody and we have compassion and we act accordingly. And I'm drawn back to my call with the ATO just a couple of days ago, where I had this whole pile of mail that had just come in after I'd been traveling for 3 weeks. And I knew if I did a BPay over the weekend, even though I just got the mail, because of the processing, it wouldn't have been paid in time. And I wanted to talk to somebody about, hey, what's the best way of handling it? So talking to the ATO call center, they understood, hey, she's a keynote speaker, she was traveling, no problem, we'll grant you the extension. We know that BPay takes a couple of days to actually finish. But I'm a dual citizen, I'm American and Australian. If I were talking to the IRS about the same thing, they'd be talking to me about penalties for being late instead of having that kind of compassion and understanding. As we start to have these AIs integrated in with our workforce, we absolutely do not want to lose that culture of compassion and empathy. We want to actually emphasize it rather than do away with it. And similarly, I think we're going to need what I would call a chief ethics officer, because once again, when you have these AIs, there are often things that happen that are unpredictable because the researchers are not able to see into these really, really big neural networks that happen. And this will be an executive level job with teams of people, and it will encompass a lot of things. One of the things that we'll look at is the ethics of when do you actually replace human-specific tasks or entire jobs with machines or robots. But more importantly, what are the outputs that come from these machine learning algorithms? So here's an example out of the US. It's from the criminal justice system. And they were using an AI to look at the instance of recidivism. In other words, the potential of a criminal to recommit a crime. And what happened was this AI was lenient towards white parolees and harsh towards non-white parolees across the board. And the researchers were really perplexed about why this was happening. And one of the things that was fed into it, well, there were 137 factors that were fed into this AI decision making, including lots of documents about, a criminal as he or her went through their career path, but none of them had to do with race or ethnicity or gender or anything else that might be discriminatory, yet this is exactly what happened. And I have a theory, and I think that what's happened is that you've got these unconscious social biases that get fed in by humans into reports about people as they progress through the criminal system. And the AI has picked up on these unconscious social biases and used that as part of its weighting and decision making in how it then handles that person's request for a parole. So if you can imagine in the tax office situation, you would want to be very careful if you're using an AI to look at a particular person's tax situation, that there aren't unconscious social biases that are built into this decision-making process, and that you actually have teams of people that are routinely examining what kinds of inputs are being put into these decision factors and what are the outputs, and are they congruent with what a team of humans would actually come up with. And that's going to be a really, really big issue as we start to see more and more automation all around us in our lives, because it's not just from the tax office perspective you've got to consider it. It'll be your insurance company and your healthcare provider and employers across the board, and almost anything that you want to do. You really want to be very careful that there's not unconscious social biases being built into these systems and are making decisions on behalf of humans that a human really wouldn't make. Another thing that's going to be super important going forward is what I would call a privacy manager. And I talked a little bit about voice recognition and always on, always listening, always recording, but where does privacy stop and start? You know, it's not about having something that you want to hide. It's actually about having things that you consider near and dear to your heart, or that are private to your family or your medical situation or your job situation, that you just don't want to share with the world. And increasingly, companies are collecting more and more and more information about their clients and everybody that they interact with, and they're storing it. And we also need to look very carefully about what data we're storing, and specifically how we're storing it. If someone actually hacks into that data, are we opening somebody up for identity theft or cyberbullying, or actually ruining their life because there's been a data breach? And there are some pretty strong data privacy laws coming into effect very soon where there are big fines. But it's not even just about big fines. What has been shown time and again with companies that have experienced data breaches is that their stock price drops between 5 and 10% immediately. And in the case of Walmart, where there was a massive data breach a few years ago, they actually lost about $1 billion. You know, they were just completely devalued because of a massive data breach. So this kind of job is going to be really crucial from an individual basis as well as from a company basis. And as an individual, you may even want to hire a privacy manager to see who has access to what information about you and what you can do about clawing it back. Another major category of jobs of the future is in the area of blockchain. How many of you have heard of blockchain? How many of you could actually describe blockchain? Probably very few. Let me just give you a really, really simple definition, you know, my dumbed down version. It's basically using advanced mathematics and cryptography to be able to transfer value using a very large number of nodes called the distributed ledger that all have to match up. So when you hear about blockchain, you probably think about cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, but it actually goes well beyond that. So currency is one thing of value that you can transfer, but you can also transfer things like stock securities. And in fact, the ASX has been experimenting with blockchain for the last 2 years. I was talking with their CFO a couple of weeks ago, and a decision is going to be made in December as to whether the ASX is going to adopt blockchain for security transfers in Australia, and it's looking pretty good. I mean, I won't presuppose the decision, but if I had to bet, I would expect that the answer is going to be yes. But of course, there's a whole ecosystem that now has to move into this area and be blockchain ready. And that's just one example. In the US, NASDAQ, they're looking at being able to use blockchain to be able to vote on stock in an AGM. They're looking at blockchain to be able to transfer titles of homes or of employment contracts or maybe even tax bills. So one of the new jobs is going to be people who are across this technology and also across cryptography and thinking about all these new applications and ways to apply it to businesses across the board. So going into the future, what's going to happen with us humans? Are we going to take technology into our bodies too? Well, a lot of people think that it's going to happen, and I actually think it will in a lot of different ways. The first way that I think it's going to happen is with something called smart contacts. This is already in the research lab, and it's being worked on by both ICT companies and biotech companies, which is what is truly extraordinary. This large picture that I'm showing you here is from Google from 2014, and it's a smart contact lens. The one that's smaller is the same contact lens from 2016, and you can see that there's a whole lot less opaque material. So what you would get with these smart contacts from an ICT perspective is, imagine instead of having augmented reality glasses that you're wearing these smart contacts, and they're completely transparent, and you've got a digital overlay sitting in front of you. So I'm looking out at the audience, and with facial recognition, I'll know all of your names. I'll be connected to the web. I'll know your LinkedIn profiles, your Facebook profiles. If we've met before, I'll have information about you. If I'm looking out at maintenance pipes, I'll be able to see the things in maintenance pipes. By the time this comes to market, the material that it's likely to be made out of is something called graphene. It's one of these new wonder materials. It's actually harder than diamond, 300 times harder than steel, but one of the thinnest, most flexible materials known to mankind, and a great conductor of electricity. Already, Google, Sony, and Samsung have patents for cameras or video cameras in smart contacts where you blink and you start taking a picture or a video. Imagine that you're sitting in a room like this and someone's wearing transparent smart contacts. How would you know that you're being filmed or taken a picture of? And you can imagine that there'd be some social context where you actually wouldn't want people to be taking pictures of you. But where it gets exciting is on the biotech side and the pharmaceutical work that's happening. Because what they're looking to do is, on top of this, add things like autofocus features. So I wear reading glasses, and it's so annoying because I'm constantly popping them on and off. If I were wearing smart contacts, not only would I have this whole digital augmented reality, I would autofocus, and I might get telephoto focus, and I might get infrared focus, because there are researchers working on that too. And it turns out in our tear ducts, we've got an amazing array of chemicals. One is called lacriglobin, and it would allow you to measure the insulin levels in your body. No more pinpricks if you're a diabetic. Or imagine that you're taking medicines and it's measuring in real time the level of drugs in your system. So instead of taking a pill every 4 hours, just because the doctor says take it every 4 hours, your smart contacts tell you when it's time to take the pill based on the chemicals in your body. And it may be 3 hours or it may be 5 hours. There are companies in the pharma industry that are looking at using smart contacts to detect a whole range of precancerous situations. They're also looking at smart contacts to do targeted drug delivery as well. The sky is endless. We're looking at about a 5 to 7 time frame for this to be commercialized, but in that time frame, we're going to start to see app stores where people have degrees in ICT and in chemistry and in biotech and biology, and combine these into all kinds of apps, and they're going to be truly useful, and that's going to be the start of us taking technology on our bodies, and then the next step is actually with implants, which I won't go into here just because of the fullness of time. So one of the important and last job that I'll talk about of the future is something that I'm calling a career transitionist, because so many of us in our daily jobs have parts of jobs that could very easily be automated. And frankly, a lot of them are pretty boring stuff that if we thought about it, we'd rather get rid of the boring stuff and then focus on doing the things that we find interesting and add value to us as individuals or to companies. And one of the things that I always like to wrap up with when I'm talking about jobs of the future is my game plan for avoiding the robo-apocalypse. And the first thing, I think, is from the top all the way down to the bottom to start educating people about where technology is really at today and where it's going to be in the near future and mid and further future. Secondly, start to work with people about where things can be automated. What are the boring bits that you can actually get rid of, and spend more time actually with customers rather than filling out paperwork, for example. But it's also important to look at what the jobs of the future are, because how can you train for something if you don't know what it is you're trying to go for? And that means working with people like me and others who are thinking about, well, what's the world going to be like in a few years? What are the new jobs? How do they fit into my skills and talents? What things do I need to learn to be able to move into these new roles? And I see that as part of corporate and government responsibility, we need to start reskilling people to take advantage of these new technologies and to make this transition. I think if we do this, then we will not find ourselves with an unemployment rate of 40 to 50%, that we will start to transition people into new and interesting careers. And what I've shown you today is just the tip of the iceberg of some of the cool new jobs out there. So thank you so much. I guess it's now time for some questions.
Yes. Right.
Okay, and there's a burning question here.
So I will take some questions from live streaming through here, but let's go first to Canberra.
Based on the new jobs of the future, in terms of raising our children, is there, obviously we're not going to know what the jobs are like in 30 years, but taking into account all of this new technology, what should we be doing to help not only ourselves, but our families and the children and the people around us get ready for this? There's lots of talk of, only 1 hour a day screen time, but obviously if we're going to be wearing contacts that are made of screens, that's not going to be entirely achievable. How do we prepare our children and ourselves, and how are schools and universities preparing for this?
Yes, and that's a really important question. And the number one skill, I would say, is flexibility, and the fact that you're not going to train just for one career for life. And that when you start thinking of a career, you think of different things that you're going to do over a lifetime, which may, because of things like genetic engineering, be a much extended lifetime. I would also very much stress that skills in the STEM area will be very important, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but social skills are also really important. And I think if we've got people that have that combination of STEM and social and philosophy and political science, and actually big thinkers thinking about what are the implications on society, then we're actually going to be raising young people and re-educating ourselves as middle-aged people, or somewhere on the spectrum, to have that flexibility of mind to be able to go with the flow, and also to understand that we're now on this curve that's going like this, and that things are going to start to change rapidly. And if we dig in our heels and say, no, I don't want to learn a new skill, then we could find ourselves in deep trouble, where a skill that we have is something that can be automated, and because of cost pressures and competition, probably will be automated. Skills that involve interaction with people are going to be very highly valued. And I'd say that by teaching your children empathy and social skills, you're going to be doing them a great, great big favor.
So there's a question from Sarah. Do we have a plan around what happens when AI is too smart? Is that going to be an issue?
Oh, look, and that's another really great question. And there was a convention of AI researchers in January of this year, and one of the questions put to them was, is there an upper limit that we can say on how smart an AI will get? And the answer resoundingly was no. We would be foolish if we tried to put an upper limit, at this stage, on how smart an AI can get. Another question that was put to the researchers was, how long do you think it will be before AIs actually have human-level intelligence? So rather than just focusing on a narrow task, which is even what the smartest AIs do, they're very focused, to start to look at what we call general intelligence. And half of the AI researchers thought that that could happen between 2040 and 2050. And by the year 2075, 95% of the researchers thought that that was absolutely possible. So from my perspective, one of the things that we need to do now, while AIs are in their infancy, I reckon, even though they're really sophisticated, they're like a 2-year-old right now in terms of their capabilities. We need to raise them to be good AIs and to actually work with people. And I'll draw again to science fiction, and I'll let you look this up. Ian M. Banks is a prolific author who sadly passed away just a few years ago, and he wrote a series called the Culture Series, intertwining novels. But in this series, it had very, very advanced AIs called minds that often were controlling, massive outer space vessels and all kinds of things, but coexisting with all kinds of biologic life, whether it be human or alien. And they managed to have a culture that had the best of both, that were symbiotic with each other. And I think it was because of the way that these AIs or minds were raised to actually value the biologic life as well. Another thing that people are thinking of, though, is that for us to keep up with AIs, we're going to need to put into our bodies a substrata. Elon Musk is one of them thinking about this, something called neural lace that would sit in between our skull and our neocortex and actually connect our brain directly to the World Wide Web and allow us to interface directly through brain-machine interfaces with these advanced machines so that we can keep up with them. Other futurists like Ray Kurzweil believe we're not going to have neural lace. What we'll do is inject 3D printed DNA bots into our body. They'll connect to the neocortex, and that will connect directly to the World Wide Web, but there will also be medical applications as well. So there's a lot of thinking about going on how do we humans evolve to keep pace with technology, and will we be putting stuff in our body that essentially will make us a cyborg?
Very science fiction.
But also being worked on in the research
and
labs.
ethics in there as well. So as you were talking today, there was obviously a lot of resonance with things we should be thinking about in the tax office, not just the opportunities, but some of the concerns as well, the role of government, what capabilities we'll need, privacy, ethics, etc. As a large regulatory government agency, where do you think our biggest opportunities are now for using deep learning and artificial intelligence more broadly?
Yeah, well, certainly I can see that Alex could evolve into a much smarter chatbot than she already is. Basically, you've got all of these interactions that are being recorded in your call centers and on your websites from tens of thousands of individual people, business owners, tax agents, and all of that is really, really big data and really good learning. If you can imagine that Alex suddenly started to provide much more personalized information in context with what's being said, that would be one of the first steps that you could take. You could also look at how can we automate some of the processes, not only internal to the ATO, but with what taxpayers have to do. So filing paper forms, for example, I only learned just a few days ago about OSCE. I'd never even heard of it. And, I'm a fairly well-read person. So part of it is actually getting the message out there that there are some other ways that people can interact and start getting rid of some of this paper and, actually do things more efficiently and make their life easier.
And using that data for our own insights and decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah. And finding out how people are interacting with that and where they're having problems. So if you think about that AI called Eric that was looking at fraud and how people navigate through websites, you could use that same technology to see where people are getting stuck on the ATO website, where they keep coming back, trying to figure out how do I do something, trying something, going back to home page, starting again, trying again, and actually use that as an insight to actually remold the customer experience. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of things that I've been thinking about just in the last few hours.
But fantastic way to end, because we are all around the customer experience and how do we improve that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Shara. Please join me in welcoming Shara for her speech on how do we look at the future of technology and what it means for us in the tax office.
Thank you, Chandra. Thank you, everybody.